My name is Renad Mansour. I'm a research fellow at Chatham House. My work primarily looks at Iraq and the sort of challenges to rebuilding the Iraqi state now that it's coming out of sort of the ISIS years. And it's really since 2003, what are the key challenges and opportunities to really rebuilding and creating a sort of democratic Iraq with a strong and robust economy and really making Iraq a regional power. The first panel, which was sort of to introduce the conference and then the ideas, looked mainly at the kind of political process in Iraq, the challenges and opportunities ahead. And there was an interesting mix of sort of optimism, right? The Islamic State is no longer in territorial control, although it exists. The security situation in Baghdad is better than it's really ever been. You can walk through the streets of Basra, Baghdad, Slaymaniyah. So there was that sort of note of optimism. But also there was, of course, pessimism, or let's say fear of the challenges that lie ahead as to whether Iraq could actually rebuild and come out of that cycle that it's been in, which is that cycle of building and then destruction, as we saw in 2014 when the Islamic State took over a third of the country. And what we've seen from the elections moving forward is a kind of citizen despair. So I think the big sort of, let's say, disillusionment. And I think the big takeaway from the first session was, okay, there are elections, there is a vote, but how do we bridge the gap between the elite and the citizen, right? When we talk about inclusivity, we shouldn't only be focused on identity-based politics. You know, it's not about bringing Shia, Kurds, and Sunnis together. It's actually bringing citizens into the political process. That's the inclusivity that we need moving forward. And I spent a lot of time before the election traveling around Iraq, south, center, north, trying to really get a sense of what are the big issues for the voter. And most Iraqis said, we're not going to vote. We just, and when I would say why, they would say mainly two things. One, it doesn't matter who you vote for because the same leadership will emerge. It'll be the same cast of characters playing a musical chairs of posts. And two, there might be fraud and there might, you know, is the system actually legitimate? And sadly, both of these things have come out. So I guess you could say that Iraqis predicted this would happen, hence the very low voter turnout compared to previous years. The biggest challenge is when we talk about change, one would hope that elections would be the vehicle or the driver for change. So if you're not happy with your government, every 4 years, you can have a vote to change. Sadly, what Iraqis have learned is change won't come from elections. And I suppose that's the biggest worry. There is still hope. Iraqis haven't given up. They do want change. You see that with the protest movement that's lasted years, since the summer of 2015, where you can get millions in the squares of Baghdad, in Basra, in Slaymaniyah. There has been also positivity in that sectarianism isn't really an issue anymore. You know, Shias won't just vote for a Shia leader because she is Shia. Kurds are no longer just happy with Kurdish nationalism. They're expecting more out of their leaders. And I think to some extent that's a maturation of the electorate, right? In areas like Baghdad and Basra, Slaymaniyah, elsewhere, because they haven't seen conflict for some time now, right? I mean, they're asking for more and expecting more from their leaders. Certainly, I think business is a solution, but not business only in bringing cash into the country, because what we've seen since 2003 is a lot of cash going into the country, but not actually trickling down. So the question is, how can business help that cash trickle down? How can business help employment? How can the youth find jobs? So I think you need to bring in the structural challenges into the conversation when we talk about investment and business. And that's why, you know, our retreat this year with IBBC is very important, because it's about education. It's about the youth. It's about how can we create a sort of middle class. These are all important questions that are being asked today, yesterday and today, and this weekend, about how business can help rebuild the Iraqi state. At the local level, there are many sort of leaders coming up. This is civil society. These are teachers, engineers, professionals at the local level. They face a lot of challenges and they need a lot of support. They're trying to build a space which is outside the political party system, which is outside the traditional leaderships. The challenge, of course, is all the money, power is in those traditional lines of leadership. So you do see this new generation, you see youth, and as I say, the youth are demanding more from their leaders, and if their leaders don't deliver, they'll go to the streets again, and they'll invade the parliament again, and they'll continue to demand this change. So just, naturally, there will be new leaders who will emerge. The question becomes, how can we facilitate the sort of the emergence of next Iraqi leaders? As I say, I think civil society is very important. I think, you do have a free and fair press in Iraq. Social media has become huge. These leaders who I'm talking about will have hundreds of thousands of followers. But social media is good for them because it gives them that channel where formal channels won't give them, that sort of vehicle, that driver. So it has to be about creating that space for these leaders to feel like they can have a voice. But also, as well, it has to be on more accountability on the traditional parties and the traditional leaderships, right? At the moment, they have a lot of autonomy, a lot of power, and a lot of wealth. Look at the elections, for example. They're able to get so much money. There's no real accountability. There's no real sort of tracking of finances as you would have in Western liberal democracies, let's say. So it'll have to be about kind of evening out the playing field so that this youth or these leaders who are outside the traditional structure of power could have a chance to become prime minister one day. You have many of the leaders say the right things, and some of them, are investing in education. Some leaders are investing in youth programs. But at the end of the day, they're also a victim of the structure that was set up after 2003 and the way that the cards work and sort of what they call the horse trading for power, I think inhibits real change. But nonetheless, you do have several good leaders in Baghdad as well as the different regional and provincial governments that are trying to look forward into the next generation. I think definitely the model of going local, looking for local change or change within certain ministries and certain individuals could be the best way to move forward, because I don't think it's possible to have a grand sort of scheme of change all at once. It'll be gradual, and I think the expectation that Iraq overnight will become this fledgling, democracy is a bit naive. I think Iraqis are also aware that this is going to require time. I mean, how long did it take Europe? How long did it take North America and other countries? Surprisingly, I think not just in Iraq, but in the region, there is this longevity of age with many of the leaders, but you see in Iraq and elsewhere very old leaders. And then you'll see newer leaders emerging, and you're starting to see that. So naturally, you will have a new leadership at some point. Some of the discussions we've been having today, and I'm sure we'll have tomorrow, is about, is this the right time to invest in Iraq? I mean, clearly there's an opportunity there. Clearly Iraq is a very wealthy country. Clearly Iraq has a history of engagement with international companies and a history of providing human capital, but other types of capital as well for these companies. So what I would say is, I mean, there are certain sectors where the investments can go and there are returns being made, but there needs to be a double-pronged, as I keep saying. It's not just about sending money in, but it's also about supporting the private sector, but also the education programs and the youth programs to make sure that every dollar or pound that's spent in Iraq, or dinar, that's spent in Iraq can actually benefit and trickle down and help build. So oftentimes when I'm critical of what's happening in Iraq, it's because I'm comparing it to, let's say, where we're sat in the United Kingdom, or to the US, or to Europe, let's say. So I suppose it must be pessimistic if you're comparing Iraq to very, much more successful cases. It must be an optimistic note, right? I mean, and it's the optimists who compare Iraq to, let's say, other failing states. So I think Iraq is kind of in the middle, but certainly there's an opportunity. As I say, coming out of ISIS, coming out of sort of really dark years, there's an opportunity to really rebuild the state. I think there are leaders who are interested in trying to rebuild the state. I think the street have realized that they have a voice, and they can protest, and they can not vote, and they can really have an impact on the political system. But It'll have to be, how can we change that structure, that muhassasa system, the identity politics, the political party power, the fact that individuals are more powerful than institutions. How can we build institutions? How can we build the rule of law? The ideas are there, it just needs to be implemented.